My mother-in-law moved into our house while we were on vacation and declared, "This is my son's home now." I smiled and said nothing. 3 weeks later, when she discovered whose name was actually on the deed, it was already too late. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It was supposed to be a dream vacation. 2 weeks in Hawaii, a celebration of our 5th wedding anniversary, and the success of my first solo photography exhibition. Mark had surprised me with the tickets on a random Tuesday, sliding the envelope across our kitchen island while I edited photos for an upcoming magazine feature. "We need this," he'd said, and he wasn't wrong. Between my growing photography business and his promotion at Horizon Tech, we'd barely seen each other over the past few months. The craftsman house we'd lovingly renovated in Pleasant Hills had become more of a waystation than a home, somewhere to sleep before the next workday began. I should have known something was wrong when Mark suggested we leave our spare key with his mother, just in case. Judith Miller had never been my biggest fan. In the 5 years Mark and I had been married, she'd made it abundantly clear that I wasn't what she'd envisioned for her only son. Too independent, too career-focused, not family-oriented enough, which was really just code for not having provided her with grandchildren yet. "Are you sure that's necessary?" I'd asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "We have that smart lock system. We can unlock it remotely if there's an emergency." Mark had shrugged, that familiar look of avoidance crossing his face whenever potential conflict with his mother arose. "Mom's not great with technology, Becca. It would make her feel better to have a physical key. She worries." That was Judith's superpower, worrying in a way that somehow always ended with her getting what she wanted. But this was our anniversary trip, and I wasn't going to let it start with an argument. So I relented. The key was copied. The spare was handed over during an uncomfortable dinner where Judith reminded us 3 separate times how quiet her condo had become since Mark's father passed away 2 years ago. The warning signs were there. I just wasn't reading them clearly enough. Hawaii was everything we needed. Sun-soaked beaches, uninterrupted time together, and most importantly, no cell service at our remote bungalow. For the first time in months, Mark and I reconnected, making plans for the future, talking about finally starting that family Judith was so desperate for. Even discussing the possibility of me cutting back on assignments to focus on more local studio work. "I want you to be happy," Mark had said, as we watched the sunset on our final evening. Whatever that looks like. If only he'd meant it. We returned to Oakwood on a Sunday afternoon, jet-lagged but rejuvenated. The Uber dropped us at the curb of our craftsman home, and I remember feeling that flutter of happiness at seeing our front porch again, the hanging ferns I'd planted, the porch swing Mark had installed last summer. Home. Then I noticed the curtains in the front window had been changed. The light cream linens I'd splurged on from that boutique in Columbus had been replaced with heavy floral drapes I'd never seen before. "Mark," I said slowly, "did you ask someone to redecorate while we were gone?" He looked confused, following my gaze to the window. "No, why would I?" The front door swung open before he could finish his sentence. And there stood Judith, wearing an apron, her silver-streaked hair freshly styled, looking for all the world like she belonged there. "Welcome home," she exclaimed, arms wide, as if she were greeting us at her house, not ours. "I've made pot. Roast for dinner, Mark. Your favorite." I stood frozen on the walkway as Mark moved forward to hug his mother. Over his shoulder, Judith's eyes met mine, and that's when I knew. This wasn't a welcome home visit. This was something else entirely. "Mom," Mark said, pulling back from the embrace, confusion evident in his voice. "What are you doing here?" "Living here, of course," she replied brightly. "I moved in last week." Surprise! The sheer audacity of it left me speechless. Mark sputtered beside me. You? What? Mom? We never discussed. Oh, don't be silly, she interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. After you left, I got to thinking about how empty that condo feels and how much space you two have in this big house. It just made sense. Come inside. Your room is exactly how you left it. I've been using the guest room. My room, not our room. Your room. The distinction wasn't accidental. I finally found my voice as we crossed the threshold. Judith, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We didn't invite you to move in with us. She turned to me, her smile never faltering, though her eyes hardened slightly. Rebecca, dear, this is my son's home. I'm his mother. I don't need an invitation. Actually, I started, but Mark's hand on my arm stopped me. I recognized that look. The silent plea to not make a scene, to handle this later, privately. The same look he'd given me at our wedding when Judith had rearranged all my carefully planned seating assignments without asking. Let's talk about this after dinner, he murmured. We're tired from the flight. And just like that, I was expected to sit down at my own dining table, eat a meal prepared in my kitchen by a woman who had invaded my home, and pretend this was all perfectly normal. For the sake of peace, I did. But inside, something had shifted. A line had been crossed, and for the first time in our marriage, I wasn't sure Mark and I were standing on the same side of it. Dinner was excruciating. Judith dominated the conversation, talking about all the improvements she'd made to the house while we were away. She'd reorganized the kitchen cabinets because my system wasn't intuitive. She'd replaced several of my carefully selected decor items with her own because they were more appropriate for a family home. She'd even converted my home office, the space where I edited my photographs and managed my business, into what she called a proper guest room. Where are my things? I asked, setting down my fork with deliberate care. Oh, I boxed them up, she replied, not meeting my eyes. They're in the garage. You didn't need all that space just for computer work. You can set up a little desk in the corner of the bedroom if you need to. I looked at Mark, waiting for him to say something, to defend me, to express even a fraction of the outrage I was feeling. Instead, he stared at his plate, pushing around a piece of carrot. Mark, I prompted, my voice tight with restraint. Don't you think we should discuss this? He cleared his throat uncomfortably. Mom, you should have asked us first, but what's done is done. We can figure out a new arrangement. What's done is done. As if his mother's actions were equivalent to a spilled glass of water. An inconvenience to be dealt with, not a complete violation of our privacy and autonomy. A new arrangement? I echoed, disbelief coloring my words. Mark, she moved into our house without permission. She's rearranged our home. She's put my work equipment in boxes. Judith cut in smoothly, patting Mark's hand. I know it's an adjustment, Rebecca, but family helps family. And now that you two are talking about starting a family of your own, you'll need someone to help with the children. It just makes sense for me to be here. I nearly choked. Who said anything about... Then I stopped, realization dawning. I turned to Mark. You told her about our private conversations in Hawaii? He had the decency to look embarrassed. I called her a few times from the hotel. I was excited about our plans. But I knew better. Those calls hadn't been about sharing good news. They'd been about seeking approval. And somehow, during those conversations, our tentative dreams of starting a family had been twisted into an invitation for Judith to insert herself permanently into our lives. I pushed back from the table, unable to continue the charade. I need some air. Neither of them tried to stop me as I walked out the front door. I ended up at Riverside Cafe, staring into a cooling cup of coffee, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My home had been invaded, my privacy violated, my workspace dismantled, and my husband, the person who was supposed to be my partner, had offered nothing more than mild discomfort in response. "Becca? Is that you?" I looked up to see Karen Thompson, our neighbor from 3 doors down, and the real estate agent who had helped us find our house. Her friendly face was a welcome sight in the midst of my turmoil. "Are you okay?" she asked, sliding into the booth across from me. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "More like a demon," I muttered, then sighed. "Sorry. Mother-in-law problems." Karen's eyebrows rose. "Ah, Judith. Say no more. What's she done now?" I laughed humorlessly. "Moved into our house while we're on vacation. Rearranged everything. Converted my office into her bedroom. Declared it's Mark's house, so she has every right to be there." Karen's jaw dropped. "She did not. She did. And Mark is being Mark about it." We both knew what that meant. Mark Miller. Brilliant with computers, terrible with confrontation, especially when it came to his mother. "That's not just crossing a boundary, that's demolishing it and building a condominium on top," Karen said, shaking her head. "What are you going to do?" It was a good question. What was I going to do? Rolling over and accepting this situation wasn't an option. This was my home too. More than Judith knew, actually. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I'm not sure yet," I admitted, "but I'm not going to let her take over our lives." Karen reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Whatever you need, I'm here." I nodded gratefully, an idea beginning to form. Karen wasn't just my neighbor and friend. She was also the person who had handled all the paperwork when we bought the house. She knew exactly whose name was on the deed. When I returned home hours later, the house was quiet. Mark was sitting alone in the living room, the TV on but muted. "Where's your mother?" I asked, hanging my jacket by the door. "She went to bed early. Jet lag." He at least had the grace to look ashamed. "Becca, I'm sorry. I should have stood up to her at dinner." "Yes, you should have." I sat across from him, keeping my voice level. "Mark, she can't stay here. You know that, right?" He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit he'd had since college. "It's complicated. She sold her condo." I felt like I'd been slapped. "She what?" "That's why she moved in. She sold the condo last month. She said she was going to tell us, but then we surprised her with the news about the Hawaii trip, and she didn't want to ruin it. So instead, she waited until we were gone to ambush us?" I could hear my voice rising and made an effort to control it. "Mark, do you not see how manipulative that is?" He looked miserable. "She doesn't have anywhere else to go, Becca." "That's not true, and you know it. She could have bought another place. She could have rented an apartment. She could have asked us first." I took a deep breath. This isn't about her needing a place to stay. This is about her wanting to control our lives. "She's my mother," he said weakly. "And I'm your wife," I countered. "We're supposed to be partners. We're supposed to make decisions like this together." Mark was silent for a long moment. "I don't know what to do," he finally admitted. "I can't just throw her out." I studied my husband, this man I loved, who had always been caught between his mother's expectations and his own desires, who had been conditioned his entire life to believe that keeping the peace was more important than standing up for himself, or for me. "I need to know where you stand, Mark," I said quietly. "Is this our home, or is this your mother's new domain?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Can't it be both? Just until we figure something else out?" And there it was, the compromise that wasn't really a compromise at all, the path of least resistance, the answer that would keep him from having to make a real choice. I stood up, suddenly exhausted. "I'm going to bed. We'll talk more tomorrow." But as I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, the only space in the house that Judith apparently hadn't felt entitled to commandeer, I already knew what needed to happen. This wasn't just about Judith moving in without permission. This was about years of boundaries crossed, of Mark's inability to prioritize our marriage over his mother's demands, of my own reluctance to force the issue for fear of being cast as the villainous daughter-in-law. No more. Morning came, and with it, clarity. I waited until I heard Judith bustling around in the kitchen, waited until Mark left for work with a hesitant kiss on my cheek and a whispered, "We'll figure this out," before I made my move. I found Judith at the kitchen table, newspaper spread, out, coffee in hand, looking for all the world like she owned the place. "Good morning, Rebecca," she said, not looking up. "There's coffee in the pot. I've been thinking we should redo these countertops. Granite is so outdated, quartz would be much more practical." I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat across from her. "We need to talk, Judith." She turned the page of her newspaper. "About the countertops? I was thinking we could go look at samples this weekend." "No," I said firmly. "About you living here." That got her attention. She folded the newspaper precisely, squaring the corners before meeting my gaze. "I thought we settled this yesterday. This arrangement makes the most sense for everyone." "It makes sense for you," I corrected. "Not for Mark and me." Her lips thinned. "Mark doesn't seem to have a problem with it." "Mark avoids conflict, especially with you. But that doesn't mean he's happy about this situation." Judith's expression hardened. "I raised that boy. I know what's best for him better than anyone, including you." I took a sip of coffee, using the moment to center myself. "Judith, I understand you want to be close to your son. But what you've done, moving in without asking, rearranging our home, displacing my workspace, that's not acceptable." "This is my son's house," she said dismissively. "And as his mother—" "Actually," I interrupted, "it's not." She blinked. "Excuse me? This house isn't Mark's, it's mine." Judith laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Don't be ridiculous. Mark told me all about how he bought this place before you were even engaged." I smiled, feeling a strange calm settle over me. "Is that what he told you? That's interesting, because Mark's name isn't on the deed. Mine is." The color drained from Judith's face as she processed my words. She shook her head firmly, as if she could reject this new reality through sheer force of will. "You're lying," she said, but there was a hint of uncertainty in her voice now. "This house was purchased before you two were married. Mark told me he bought it as an investment." I reached for my phone, pulling up the photos I'd taken last night. While Mark was showering, screenshots of the property records Karen had sent me. I slid the phone across the table. "Feel free to check the county records yourself," I said calmly. "I bought this house with money from my trust fund, money my grandmother left me specifically for purchasing my first home. Mark and I weren't even engaged yet. I was renting it to him when we first started dating." Judith stared at the phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she zoomed in on the document. I watched as she scrolled through the images, her jaw tightening with each swipe. "This can't be right," she muttered. "Mark would have told me." "Would he?" I asked, taking my phone back. "Or would he have let you believe what made you happy, what kept the peace? That's his pattern, isn't it? Telling you what you want to hear, then figuring out how to live his actual life around your expectations." Her eyes snapped up to mine, a flash of recognition in them that told me I'd hit the mark. For a moment, just a moment, I glimpsed something like self-awareness in Judith Miller's expression. Then it was gone, replaced by the familiar mask of wounded indignation. "So that's how it is," she said, her voice hardening. "You've turned my son against me, made him keep secrets from his own mother." I shook my head. "Mark makes his own choices, Judith. I've never asked him to lie to you. But I am asking you now, as the legal owner of this property, to respect our home and our marriage. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I need to speak with Mark. Of course, I said, remaining seated. He'll be home around 6. In the meantime, I'd appreciate it if you could return my office to its original state. Judith's lips pressed into a thin line. Without another word, she turned and marched out of the kitchen. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, followed by the firm slam of the guest room door. Round 1 to me. I spent the morning reassembling my office, carefully unpacking the boxes Judith had relegated to the garage. My camera equipment, thankfully, seemed undamaged. My editing software was still installed on my computer. But the violation of having someone touch my things, rearrange my space, dismiss my work as unimportant, that wouldn't be so easily fixed. As I placed the last of my photography books back on their shelf, my phone buzzed with a text from Mark. Mom called. She's upset. What happened? I stared at the message, considering my response. Part of me wanted to fire back something sarcastic. Gee, I wonder why the woman who invaded our home might be upset about being called out. But that wouldn't solve anything. We had a conversation about the house. I typed finally. We'll talk when you get home. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, I'm coming home now. I sighed. Of course he was. One distressed call from his mother, and Mark was ready to abandon his workday. Meanwhile, I'd spent years carefully avoiding scheduling photo shoots during Judith's birthday week because Mark couldn't handle her disappointment if we weren't available to celebrate exactly when she wanted. I busied myself with editing photographs from a wedding I'd shot the weekend before our trip, losing myself in the familiar rhythm of adjustments and enhancements. By the time I heard the front door open, I had almost regained my equilibrium. Mark appeared in the doorway of my restored office, his expression a mixture of confusion and apprehension. Becca? Mom's locked herself in the guest room. She won't come out. What's going on? I set my stylus down carefully. I told her the truth about who owns the house. He blanched. You what? She kept referring to this as your house, using that as justification for moving in without asking, so I clarified the situation. Mark ran a hand through his hair, looking agitated. Why would you do that? You know how sensitive she is about money and status. I took a deep breath, trying to quell the surge of frustration. Because she moved into our home without permission, Mark. She rearranged our things. She dismantled my workspace. She's talking about renovating our kitchen. All without asking because she believes she has the right to do so as your mother. She's going through a hard time, he said weakly. After Dad died? Your father died 2 years ago, I interrupted. I was sympathetic. I was supportive. But this isn't grief, Mark. This is control. You don't understand what she's like when she gets upset. Actually, I do. I've spent 5 years watching you bend over backward to avoid upsetting her. And now she's living in our house and you're still prioritizing her feelings over our marriage. Mark looked stricken. That's not fair. Isn't it? I stood up, facing him. Directly, your mother moved into our house without asking. When confronted, she claimed it was her right because it's your house. When I clarified that legally, it's actually my house, she locked herself in a room and called you to come rescue her. And here you are, racing home from work, asking me what I did wrong. He opened his mouth, closed it again. He trailed off, clearly struggling to formulate a defense. You want everyone to be happy. I finished for him. I know, but Mark, that's not possible here. Your mother has bulldozed every reasonable boundary. She's not going to be happy unless she gets exactly what she wants, which is control over our lives. What do you want me to do? He asked, sounding genuinely lost. I want you to back me up, I said simply. I want you to tell your mother that moving in without asking wasn't okay. that rearranging our home without permission wasn't okay, that she needs to find her own place to live. The conflict played out visibly across his features, the desire to please me warring with his lifelong habit of yielding to his mother's demands. I could almost hear the excuses forming. She's family. She has nowhere else to go. It's only temporary. But before he could respond, the guest room door opened down the hall and Judith appeared, her eyes red-rimmed but her chin held high. "I've called Jennifer," she announced. "I'll be staying with her until I can find a more permanent arrangement." I blinked in surprise. Mark's sister lived 3 states away. This was more dramatic than I'd expected, even from Judith. "Mom, that's not necessary," Mark began, but she held up a hand. "It's clear I'm not welcome here," she said, her voice quavering just enough to convey wounded dignity. "I'll be out of your way by tomorrow morning." With that, she retreated, back into the guest room, closing the door with careful precision. Mark turned to me, accusation in his eyes. "Are you happy now?" The question stung more than I wanted to admit. "This isn't about making me happy, Mark. This is about respecting boundaries. She's going to move across the country because of this." "That's her choice," I said, maintaining my calm with effort. "There are plenty of options between living in our house without permission and moving to another state. You know she doesn't see it that way. Everything is all or nothing with her." And there it was, the heart of the problem. Judith's emotional extremism had trained Mark to believe that any boundary setting would result in catastrophe. The choice was always framed as total capitulation or complete abandonment. "Mark," I said gently, "your mother is manipulating you. She always has. Moving to Jennifer's is a punishment, designed to make you feel guilty enough that you'll beg her to stay." "You don't know that," he said, but there was doubt in his voice. "I do know that. And deep down, so do you." He sat heavily on the small love seat in the corner of my office, suddenly looking exhausted. "I don't know how to fix this." I sat beside him, taking his hand. "You can't fix people, Mark. Your mother's behavior isn't your responsibility. But our marriage? That is something we're both responsible for." He nodded slowly, staring at our joined hands. "I love you," he said quietly. "I don't want to lose you." "Then stand with me," I replied simply. "That's all I'm asking." The rest of the evening passed in tense silence. Mark tried knocking on the guest room door several times, but Judith refused to emerge. She was committed to her martyrdom, apparently willing to go hungry rather than face us again that night. I slept fitfully, aware of Mark tossing and turning beside me. Around 3 a.m., I heard him slip out of bed, his footsteps soft on the hallway carpet. Murmured voices drifted from downstairs, Mark and Judith, having the conversation she had been waiting for him to initiate. I considered joining them, then decided against it. This was Mark's battle to fight. I had already said my piece. When I came downstairs the next morning, Judith was gone, along with her hastily packed suitcases. Mark sat at the kitchen table, a mug of cold coffee between his hands, staring at nothing. "She left for the airport," he said without looking. Jennifer's husband is picking her up when she lands." I poured myself a cup of coffee, giving him space to process. "Are you okay?" He shrugged listlessly. "She said I was choosing you over family, like you're not family too." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. Not for standing my ground, but for the pain it was causing him. "What did you tell her?" "That I love her, but she crossed a line. That she can't just move in without asking, can't rearrange our home, can't expect to control our lives." He finally looked up at me, his eyes tired but clear. "That I am choosing you, because you're my wife, and that's what I promised when we got married." Relief washed over me, so powerful it was almost dizzying. For the first time since we'd returned from Hawaii, I felt like we were truly partners again. "Thank you," I said softly. He reached for my hand across the table. I should have said it sooner. Should have stopped this before it started. He hesitated, then added, "Why didn't you ever tell me that it bothered you, the way I handle my mom?" I considered the question carefully, because I didn't want to be the stereotypical wife who comes between a man and his mother, because I thought it would get better with time, because I love you and I didn't want to make you choose. But now I realize that by not speaking up, I was letting your mother make all the choices. And that wasn't fair to either of us. He nodded slowly. What happens now? It was a good question. Judith was gone, but the damage she'd inflicted to our home, to our peace of mind, to our marriage, remained. Now we rebuild, I said. Not just the house, but us. We need to be clear about our boundaries, with your mother and with each other. She's not going to change overnight, Mark warned. She'll try again, in different ways. I know, but now we know we can face it together. For the first time since we'd returned home, Mark smiled, a small, tired smile, but genuine. Together, he agreed. The next few weeks were a strange mixture of healing and hurt. Judith called daily at first, alternating between tearful pleas for Mark to come to his senses and icy declarations that she was finally seeing him for who he really was. When emotional manipulation failed to produce results, she tried a different tactic, calling Mark's cousins, his childhood friends, even his boss, spinning a tale of abandonment and cruelty. She told Uncle Steve that we kicked her out into the street, Mark reported one evening, disbelief in his voice as he hung up the phone. That we changed the locks while she was at church and threw her belongings on the lawn. That's quite an embellishment, I remarked dryly. Especially considering she left voluntarily and took a first-class flight your sister paid for. Mark shook his head. I don't understand why she's doing this. Because it's worked before, I said gently. Every time she's created drama in the past, you've rushed to smooth things over, to make it right. She's escalating because her usual tactics aren't working. It was hard for Mark to accept, but with each outlandish story, each attempt at manipulation, the pattern became clearer. Judith wasn't a helpless victim of circumstance. She was a woman accustomed to getting her way through emotional coercion, and she wasn't taking the loss of control well. Meanwhile, our home slowly returned to normal. I restored my office completely, hanging the photographs Judith had deemed unsuitable back on the walls. We replaced the heavy floral curtains with our original cream linens. The kitchen returned to my organization system, which Mark admitted made more sense than his mother's. Anyway, but the most significant change was in our relationship. For the first time, we were having honest conversations about Mark's family dynamic, about the patterns he'd been raised to accept as normal, about the subtle ways Judith had been influencing our marriage from day one. She vetted every girl I ever dated, Mark confessed one night as we sat on our porch swing. Even in college, 300 miles away, I'd find myself thinking, would Mom approve? Before asking someone out. And me? I asked curiously. Did she approve of me? He laughed ruefully. Not at all. She said you were too independent, too focused on your career, that you'd never be satisfied being just a wife and mother. She was right about that much, I acknowledged, though I never saw those roles as just anything. I know. He squeezed my hand. That's one of the things I love about you. You know who you are and what you want. I've always envied that certainty. The conversation shifted something between us, opening a door to deeper understanding. Mark began seeing a therapist who specialized in family dynamics, working to untangle the complicated web of obligation and guilt that had defined his relationship with his mother. I supported him, but gave him space to process on his own terms. 6. Weeks after Judith's dramatic departure, Jennifer called with news. "Mom bought a condo," she reported, sounding equal parts relieved and suspicious. 2-bedroom, in a nice retirement community about 20 minutes from us. She's moving in next week. "That was fast," I remarked, putting the phone on speaker so Mark could hear. "Too fast," Jennifer agreed. "She couldn't have qualified for a mortgage that quickly, which means she had this place lined up before she ever showed up at your door." Mark and I exchanged glances. "Are you saying she planned this whole thing?" he asked. "I'm saying our mother always has a backup plan," Jennifer replied. "I think she wanted to move in with you guys. Figured you'd be too polite to kick her out once she was established. But she had this place in her back pocket just in case." The realization landed like a stone. Judith's emergency had been manufactured from the start. She'd deliberately sold her condo and created a situation where Mark would feel obligated to take her in. But she'd been careful to have an alternative ready if her scheme failed. After we hung up, Mark sat in stunned silence for several minutes. "I can't believe she would do that," he finally said. But I could see in his eyes that he could believe it, that pieces were falling into place, illuminating patterns he'd never allowed himself to recognize before. "What do we do now?" he asked. "We keep doing what we've been doing," I said. "Setting boundaries, communicating honestly, building our life together. Your mother is going to be your mother, Mark. We can't change her, but we can change how we respond to her." He nodded slowly. "You're right." He paused, then added with a wry smile, "And remind me to consult you before giving out any more spare keys." I laughed, feeling the last of the tension between us dissolve. Deal. 3 months later, we installed a state-of-the-art security system with cameras and electronic locks. Not because we were afraid of another surprise move-in, Judith seemed content in her new community, especially after she became president of the Homeowners Association, but because it symbolized something important to us both. Our home was our sanctuary, and we were its guardians. Mark handled the next family holiday with a grace and firmness I'd never seen from him before. When Judith began her usual passive-aggressive comments about my career, he interrupted gently but firmly. "Mom, I'm proud of Becca's accomplishments. I'd appreciate it if you would respect that." Judith looked startled, then hurt, then calculating. But when her usual tactics of tearfulness and wounded dignity failed to elicit an apology, she adjusted, however grudgingly, to the new normal. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even always peaceful. But it was honest, and that made all the difference. 1 year after the infamous move-in incident, as we'd taken to calling it, Mark and I sat on our porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. His arm was around my shoulders, my head resting against him. "I was thinking," he said casually, "about what you said that day, about the house being yours." I tensed slightly. We hadn't discussed the property ownership since the confrontation with Judith. "What about it?" "I think we should put both our names on the deed," he said. "Make it officially ours, not just yours or mine." I looked up, at him, searching his face for signs of resentment or obligation. Instead, I found only openness and love. "Are you sure?" I asked. "It's a big step, legally speaking." "I'm sure," he said firmly. "This past year has shown me what matters. Not who owns what, but the home we're building together, the life we're choosing every day." I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the evening sun. "I'd like that," I said simply. The next day, we called our lawyer and began the paperwork to make our house officially, legally, undeniably ours. Not mine, not Mark's, certainly not Judith's, ours. Because in the end, that's what a home really is, not just a structure or A legal document, but a space created by two people who choose each other, who stand together, who build something stronger than either could build alone. When Judith moved into our house without permission and declared, "This is my son's home now," she thought she was taking something from me. Instead, she gave me something invaluable: the chance to discover just how strong our marriage could be when tested. The opportunity to watch Mark grow into the partner I'd always known he could be. The clarity to recognize that a home isn't defined by who holds the deed, but by who holds your heart. Sometimes, the most unwelcome intrusions lead to the most necessary growth. And sometimes, what looks like losing control is actually the first step toward finding a deeper kind of strength, one built not on ownership, but on partnership. 6 months after adding Mark's name to the deed, life had settled into a new rhythm. Our home was truly ours now, a shared sanctuary where we both felt secure. Judith had remained in her condo near Jennifer, occasionally testing boundaries, but never again attempting anything as brazen as moving in unannounced. The weekly phone calls with her had become more manageable, with Mark calmly enforcing limits when she veered into manipulation. My photography business was thriving. I'd been featured in 3 major magazines and had bookings 6 months in advance. Mark's work at Horizon Tech had earned him another promotion, one that allowed him more flexibility to work from home 2 days a week. We'd found our balance, until the letter arrived. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I checked the mail and found the thick envelope from Simmons & Partners, the law firm that had handled Bill Miller's estate after his death. I frowned, turning it over in my hands as I walked back to the house. We hadn't had any contact with them since the will was settled over 2 years ago. Mark was in the kitchen making coffee when I came in. He looked up with a smile that quickly faded when he saw my expression. "What's wrong?" I held up the envelope. "Something from your dad's lawyers." His brow furrowed as he took it, examining the return address. "That's weird. Everything was finalized ages ago." We sat at the kitchen table as Mark opened the envelope, pulling out several official-looking documents. His eyes scanned the first page, then widened in shock. "What the hell?" He flipped to the next page, then the next, his complexion growing paler with each one. "Mark? What is it?" He looked up at me, disbelief written across his face. "It's about my dad's life insurance policy. The one that was supposed to pay out to Mom after he died." He swallowed hard. "Apparently, she's contesting how it was distributed." "Contesting? I thought she received everything already." "That's what I thought too." He spread the papers on the table. "But according to this, there was a second policy we didn't know about. A substantial one. And Dad changed the beneficiary 6 months before he died." I had a sinking feeling in my stomach. "Changed it to who?" Mark met my eyes. "To me." The revelation hung in the air between us. Bill Miller had secretly designated Mark as the beneficiary of a life insurance policy worth $750,000. Money that Judith clearly believed should have been hers. "There's more," Mark continued, his voice strained. "The policy had a delayed payout clause. The funds were just released last month." He ran a hand through his hair. "Mom is claiming Dad wasn't of sound mind when he made the change. She's suing to have the beneficiary designation overturned." I sat back, processing this bombshell. "She's suing you? Her own son?" "Technically, she's suing the insurance company. But yes, I'd have to be involved in the case." He looked down at the papers, his expression troubled. "Why would Dad do this? Why not tell me about it?" It was a good question. From everything Mark had told me, Bill had been a straightforward man, meticulous about his finances and planning. Secretly changing a life insurance beneficiary seemed out of character. "Does it say why he made the change?" I asked. Mark shuffled through the documents until he found a letter from Bill's financial advisor. "Here's something. The advisor says Dad came to him specifically about this policy, saying he wanted to ensure Mark had resources of his own that couldn't be controlled by Judith. He looked up at me. Dad told the advisor he was concerned about Mom's spending habits and wanted me to have financial independence. I chose my next words carefully. That doesn't sound like someone who wasn't of sound mind. It sounds like he was being thoughtful and deliberate. Yeah, Mark agreed quietly. It does. He continued reading, then let out a sharp breath. The letter also says Dad asked the advisor not to inform me until after the funds were released. He was worried I'd tell Mom before the transfer was complete. The implications of that statement were profound. Bill had known his son well enough to anticipate that Mark might cave under pressure from Judith. He'd structured the policy payout to protect Mark from exactly the kind of manipulation we'd been working to recognize and resist. Your father was looking out for you, I said gently. He understood the dynamic with your mother. Mark nodded slowly, his eyes distant. He never said anything, but looking back, I think he tried to shield me from her controlling tendencies in his own way. He sighed heavily, and now she's dragging me to court over his final wish. We spent the evening reviewing the documents, trying to understand the full implications. The lawsuit required Mark to appear in court to potentially testify against his mother's claims. It would mean confronting Judith's manipulation in the most public, explicit way possible. I need to call Jennifer, Mark decided finally. She should know about this. Jennifer's response was immediate and unequivocal. Fight it, she said firmly when Mark explained the situation via speakerphone. Dad changed that beneficiary for a reason. You know, Mom, once she gets her hands on that money, it'll be gone within a year. Designer purses and cruises and loans to those sketchy friends of hers that never get paid back. But taking her to court? Mark hesitated. It feels wrong. She's taking you to court, Mark, Jennifer pointed out, and using Dad's memory to do it, claiming he wasn't mentally competent when we both know he was sharp as a tack right up until the end. What if I just split it with her? Mark suggested. Give her half and avoid the whole legal battle? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. You could, Jennifer said finally, but ask yourself this. Is that what Dad would have wanted? He went through the trouble of changing the beneficiary in secret, making sure it couldn't be touched until now. He did that for a reason. After we hung up, Mark and I sat in silence for a while, both lost in thought. Finally, he turned to me. What do you think I should do? I reached for his hand. I think you need to honor your father's wishes. He made this decision carefully, Mark. He wanted you to have this financial security. But she's my mother, he said, the conflict evident in his voice. This could damage our relationship permanently. The relationship is already damaged, I said gently. Not because of anything you did, but because of her patterns of control and manipulation. The question is whether you're going to keep enabling those patterns or start setting firm boundaries. Mark was quiet for a long moment. I need to think about it, he said finally. The next morning, Mark called the law firm and scheduled a consultation. He wanted to understand his options before making any decisions. I offered to go with him, but he shook his head. I need to do this part on my own, he said. Figure out where I stand. I respected his choice, though it was hard to watch him struggle with such a difficult decision. Mark had spent his entire life trying to keep the peace, to be the good son Judith expected him to be. Standing up to her over the house had been challenging enough. Opposing her in a legal battle over his father's estate would be another level entirely. While Mark was at the consultation, Judith called. I let it go to voicemail, not wanting to be pulled into the middle of their conflict. But her message, which played through our home speaker system, was clearly meant for both of us to hear. Mark, I know you got the papers by now. Her voice rang through the kitchen, sharp with indignation. I hope you understand this isn't personal. It's about what's fair. Your father wasn't thinking clearly when he made that change. He would have wanted me to be taken care of. There was a pause, Then her tone shifted to something softer, more vulnerable. I'm not getting any younger, sweetheart. I need that security for my future. You wouldn't want your mother to struggle in her retirement, would you? Call me back as soon as you can. The calculated shift from righteous anger to helpless victim was so transparent it almost made me laugh. 2 years ago, it probably would have worked on Mark. Now, I wasn't so sure. When Mark returned from the consultation, his expression was resolute in a way I hadn't seen before. I'm contesting the lawsuit, he announced as he set his keys on the counter. The lawyer says we have a strong case. Dad was clearly competent when he made the change, and he documented his reasons with the financial advisor. Are you sure? I asked, studying his face. He nodded. Dad wanted me to have this money. Not just for me, but for us, for our future. He took a deep breath. And I'm done letting Mom control my life through guilt and manipulation. It stops now. Pride swelled in my chest. I'll support whatever you decide. You know that. I know. He smiled, a small but genuine smile. That's one of the reasons I'm able to do this, because I know I'm not alone anymore. Mark called Judith that evening, putting the phone on speaker so I could hear but asking me not to interject. He wanted to handle this conversation himself. Mom, I got your voicemail, he began when she answered. And I've reviewed the lawsuit with a lawyer. Oh, Mark, Judith sighed dramatically. I was hoping we could resolve this as a family, without getting lawyers involved. You filed a lawsuit, he pointed out, remarkably calm. That involved lawyers from the start. Only because I had no choice. The insurance company wouldn't listen to reason. Mom, I've seen Dad's letter to his financial advisor. He was very clear about why he changed the beneficiary. There was a brief silence. On the other end of the line. What letter? Judith's voice had lost its theatrical quality, suddenly sharp and focused. Dad left documentation explaining his decision. He was worried about your spending habits. He wanted to make sure I had financial security that couldn't be... He hesitated, then finished firmly. Controlled by you. That's ridiculous, Judith snapped. Your father would never say such a thing. I have it in writing, Mom. In his own words. Another silence, longer this time. I could almost hear Judith recalculating, adjusting her strategy. Mark, she said finally, her voice softening to a wounded whisper. You can't possibly believe I would try to control your money. I'm your mother. Everything I've ever done has been for your benefit. Mark closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with new resolve. I'm not going to argue about this. The fact is, Dad made me the beneficiary of this policy, and I intend to respect his wishes. I won't be signing over the funds, and I'll be contesting the lawsuit. After everything I've done for you. Judith's voice trembled with what sounded like genuine emotion. This is how you repay me? By watching your mother struggle financially in her old age? Mom, you're not struggling. You have Dad's pension, Social Security, the proceeds from the condo sale, and half of their investment portfolio. This policy was specifically set aside for me. It's that wife of yours, Judith hissed, abandoning the victim role as quickly as she'd adopted it. She's turned you against me. She's after the money for herself. I stiffened at the accusation, but kept my promise to stay silent. Mark's jaw clenched, but his voice remained steady. Becca has nothing to do with this decision. This is between you, me, and Dad's wishes. He took a deep breath. I love you, Mom, but I'm not going to let you manipulate me anymore. Manipulate? Judith's voice rose in indignation. Is that what she calls a mother's love? I have sacrificed everything. For you, Mark, everything. I'm not having this conversation right now, Mark said firmly. I've made my decision. We can talk again when you're ready to discuss this calmly. He ended the call before Judith could respond. then sat back, exhaling slowly. "You okay?" I asked after a moment. He nodded, a mix of emotions playing across his face. "I think so. That was harder than I expected, and easier." He looked at me. "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," I assured him. "You're setting a boundary with someone who's never respected boundaries. It's both terrifying and liberating." "She's going to call Jennifer next," he predicted. "Try to get her on her side." "Probably," I agreed. "But Jennifer seems pretty clear-eyed about the situation." Mark managed a wry smile. "Jennifer moved 3 states away for a reason. She figured out Mom's patterns long before I did. The next few days brought exactly the reaction we'd anticipated. Judith called repeatedly, alternating between tearful pleas and cold accusations. When Mark remained firm, she escalated, calling his cousins, his childhood friends, even our neighbors. The story she told painted Mark as an ungrateful son who was denying his widowed mother her rightful security in her golden years. Some believed her. Mark's cousin Steve called to express his disappointment, suggesting that family should come first. A few of our neighbors became noticeably cooler, avoiding eye contact when we waved hello. It hurt Mark more than he wanted to admit, seeing how effectively Judith could turn people against him. But others saw through the manipulation. Jennifer remained steadfastly supportive, even flying in for a weekend to help Mark prepare for the upcoming court date. Karen from down the street brought over a homemade lasagna, saying simply, "I know what it's like to have a difficult mother-in-law. This too shall pass." Most surprising was the call from Bill's brother, Uncle Ray, who rarely got involved in family matters. "Your dad talked to me about this," he told Mark gruffly. "About a year before he passed. He was worried about your mother's spending, worried she'd burn through everything he'd saved. He wanted to make sure you had something solid to build on." There was a pause. Bill was a smart man, Mark. He knew exactly what he was doing. That conversation seemed to cement Mark's resolve. His father had planned carefully, had confided in others about his concerns, had taken specific steps to secure Mark's future. Honoring those wishes wasn't just about the money. It was about respecting Bill's final act of protection for his son. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived with a weight of finality. Mark dressed carefully in the charcoal suit his father had bought him when he graduated from college. "For good luck," he said when I raised an eyebrow. I drove him to the courthouse, squeezing his hand as we pulled into the parking lot. "No matter what happens in there, I'm proud of you." He smiled, a tight, nervous smile. "Thanks. For everything." I watched him walk into the building, shoulders squared, steps determined. This wasn't the same man who had acquiesced to his mother's surprise move-in less than a year ago. This was someone who had found his voice, who was learning to stand in his own power. 3 hours later, my phone buzzed with a text from Mark. "It's over. Heading home now." I met him at the door, searching his face for clues about how the hearing had gone. To my surprise, he looked not defeated or triumphant, but peaceful. "What happened?" I asked as we settled in the living room. "The judge dismissed her case," he said simply. "Said there was overwhelming evidence that Dad was competent when he made the change, and that his intentions were clear." He ran a hand through his hair. "Mom was furious. You should have seen her face when the financial advisor's letter was entered into evidence." "Did you talk to her afterward?" He nodded. "She wouldn't look at me at first, just kept saying it wasn't fair, that I was betraying the family." A small smile flickered across his face. But then, as we were leaving, she said something interesting. "What's that?" She said, "You're more like your father than I thought." Mark's eyes met mine. I think it was supposed to be an insult, but honestly, it's the best compliment she's ever given me. I reached for his hand. "Your dad would be proud of you today." "I think he would," Mark agreed. "And not because of the money, because I finally stood up for myself." The aftermath of the lawsuit brought changes neither of us had anticipated. Judith, predictably, declared that Mark was dead to her, that she would never speak to him again. The dramatic pronouncement might have devastated him a year earlier. Now, he recognized it for what it was: another attempt at control, another manipulation tactic. "She'll call in about 3 weeks," Jennifer predicted when Mark told her about their mother's declaration. "Probably around your birthday. She won't be able to resist the opportunity to remind you what a terrible son you are for abandoning her." Jennifer was right, almost to the day. Judith called exactly 2 days before Mark's birthday, her voice taut with restrained emotion. "I suppose you're expecting a birthday card," she said when Mark answered. "Hello to you too, Mom," he replied evenly. "Actually, I wasn't expecting anything." "Well, I've always sent one, haven't I? Even now, after what you've done, I can't bring myself to forget my only son's birthday." Mark caught my eye across the kitchen, a hint of amusement in his expression. "That's thoughtful of you." "I suppose you've spent all that money already," Judith continued, unable to resist bringing up the lawsuit. "Fancy cars and expensive vacations." "Actually, I haven't touched it," Mark said truthfully. "It's in a separate account for now. I'm talking to a financial advisor about the best way to invest it." This clearly wasn't the response Judith had been expecting. There was a pause, then, "Well, that's sensible, I suppose." "Dad would have wanted me to be careful with it," Mark replied. Another pause, longer this time. "Yes, well, your father always was conservative with finances." Her tone softened slightly. "He worried about money more than was necessary, in my opinion." It was the closest thing to concession we'd heard from her, an acknowledgement, however oblique, that Bill's concerns about her spending hadn't been entirely unfounded. The conversation ended soon after, with Judith extracting a promise that Mark would call her on Sunday, their usual time. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a tentative step toward a new kind of relationship, one where Mark's boundaries were acknowledged, if not fully respected. As the months passed, the life insurance money remained untouched. Mark met regularly with a financial advisor, developing a long-term investment strategy. We discussed using a portion for a down payment on a rental property, creating a passive income stream for the future. We allocated some for retirement savings, ensuring we'd have security in our later years. But the most meaningful decision came on a quiet evening in December, as we decorated our Christmas tree. "I've been thinking," Mark said, carefully hanging a delicate ornament his father had given him as a child, "about what to do with part of the money." "Oh?" I wound a strand of lights around the middle branches. "What are you thinking?" "I want to set up a scholarship fund," he said, "in Dad's name, for students studying finance or accounting." I paused, struck by the perfect symmetry of the idea. "Mark, that's beautiful. He would have loved that." "It feels right," he agreed. "Using the money to help others, to create something lasting. Something that can't be controlled or manipulated or spent away." He smiled softly. "Something that honors what he valued." The William Miller Scholarship Fund was established the following spring, with an initial endowment that would support 2 students annually. Mark invited Judith to the small ceremony at the local community college where Bill had occasionally taught evening classes in basic accounting. To our surprise, she came, subdued but present. "Your father would have approved," she said afterward, her voice lacking its usual sharp edges. "He always did believe in education." It was a small moment, but a significant one. A glimpse of the mother Mark had always hoped for. One who could see beyond her own needs and desires to appreciate something meaningful. Our relationship with Judith would never be simple or easy. The patterns established over decades couldn't be undone in a few months or even years. She still tested boundaries, still occasionally slipped into manipulation tactics, still viewed me with suspicion as the woman who had changed her son. But something fundamental had shifted. Mark no longer bent himself into knots trying to please her. He no longer sacrificed our peace for her approval. He had found the strength to love his mother while also loving himself, and our marriage, enough to set necessary limits. As for me, I had learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone you love is the space to fight their own battles. Mark needed to find his own way through the tangled relationship with his mother, to discover his own voice, his own strength. My role wasn't to fight for him, but to stand with him, a distinction that made all the difference. 1 year after Judith's ill-fated attempt to move into our house without permission, we hosted a small gathering to celebrate the first recipients of the William Miller Scholarship. Friends, colleagues, even a few of Mark's relatives attended, raising glasses to Bill's memory and the future he was helping to build through his legacy. Judith attended, wearing a new dress and her best jewelry, accepting condolences and congratulations with practiced grace. She sat at the opposite end of the table from me, maintained a polite distance throughout the evening. But as she was leaving, she paused beside Mark, placing a hand on his arm. "Your father would be proud," she said, her voice pitched low. "Of the scholarship, of you." Mark blinked in surprise. "Thank you, Mom. That means a lot." She nodded once, then turned to go. At the door, she hesitated, glancing back at our home. The home she had once tried to claim, the home that had become the first battleground in our campaign for boundaries and respect. "You've made a nice life here," she said finally. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even particularly warm. But coming from Judith, it was an acknowledgement of something she had fought against for years, that Mark's life, his choices, his home with me, were valid and real and worthy of recognition. As we closed the door behind the last guest, Mark exhaled deeply, a sound of relief and satisfaction. "That went better than I expected," he admitted. I smiled, leaning against him as we surveyed our empty living room, evidence of the gathering, wine glasses, dessert plates, the scholarship certificates displayed on the mantel, scattered around us. "Your mom was almost pleasant," I observed. "Is this the dawning of a new era?" Mark laughed. "Let's not get carried away, but it's progress." He wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "A year ago, I couldn't have imagined standing up to her about the house, let alone the life insurance. I couldn't have imagined setting boundaries and sticking to them." "A lot can change in a year," I agreed. "A lot can change when you realize what's worth fighting for," he corrected gently, turning to face me. "When you understand what home really means." I knew he wasn't talking about the physical structure around us, the craftsman house with its renovated kitchen and cozy porch swing. He was talking about what we'd built together, the trust, the partnership, the safe harbor we'd created for each other. When Judith had moved into our house without permission and declared, "This is my son's home now," she hadn't realized the irony of her statement. This was indeed Mark's home, not because his name was on a deed or because he controlled who lived within these walls, but because he had finally found the courage to claim his own life, to build something authentic and strong with someone who saw him, valued him, and loved him exactly as he was. And that no one could take away. 2 years had passed since the William Miller Scholarship was established. The fund had grown, now supporting 4 students annually. Mark and I had settled into a comfortable rhythm, our marriage stronger for having weathered Judith's intrusions. The boundaries we'd established had transformed our relationship with her into something manageable, if not always warm. Which is why the phone call on a random Tuesday afternoon caught me completely off guard. "Rebecca." Judith's voice held none of its usual crisp authority. Instead, she sounded small, almost frightened. "Is Mark there?" "He's at work," I replied, setting down the camera lens I'd been cleaning. "Is everything all right?" A pause, then a shaky breath. "Not really. I've had a small accident." Nothing serious, she added quickly. Just a fall in the bathroom. I've called an ambulance, but I wondered if Mark might meet me at the hospital. Of course, I said automatically. I'll call him right away. Which hospital will you be at? Oakwood Memorial. Another pause. Thank you, Rebecca. The words seemed forced, as if they cost her something to say. In the 2 years since the life insurance lawsuit, Judith had maintained a polite but distant relationship with me, rarely addressing me directly unless absolutely necessary. I called Mark immediately, relaying the conversation. He sounded worried, but not panicked. I'll head to the hospital now. Can you meet me there? Are you sure you want me to come? I asked, hesitant. Judith and I had reached a delicate detente, but I doubted she'd want me present during a moment of vulnerability. Yes, Mark said firmly. We're a team, remember? I arrived at Oakwood Memorial 20 minutes later, finding Mark in the emergency room waiting area. His face relaxed slightly when he saw me. Any news? I asked, sitting beside him. He shook his head. They took her back about 10 minutes ago. The nurse said she's stable. He ran a hand through his hair. She broke her wrist, maybe her hip too. The paramedics weren't sure. I squeezed his hand. She's in good hands now. We waited in silence for nearly an hour before a doctor emerged, clipboard in hand. Family of Judith Miller. Mark stood up. I'm her son. This is my wife. The doctor nodded. Your mother has a fractured right wrist and a hairline fracture in her left hip. The wrist will need surgery to set properly. The hip doesn't require surgery, but she'll need significant rehabilitation and won't be able to live independently for at least 6 to 8 weeks. Mark absorbed this information. With a grim nod. When will she have the surgery? Tomorrow morning. We've admitted her for tonight to monitor her and prep for the procedure. The doctor hesitated. Mr. Miller, has your mother been evaluated for balance issues before? Her blood work showed some concerning vitamin deficiencies, and the nurses noted her apartment was quite cluttered, with several tripping hazards. Mark frowned. No, not that I'm aware of. She lives alone, about 3 hours from here. We talk weekly, but I haven't visited in person for several months. The doctor made a note on his clipboard. You might want to consider a home health evaluation once she's recovered. Falls like these are often the first sign that an elderly person is struggling with independent living. The word elderly landed strangely. I'd never thought of Judith as elderly. Difficult, manipulative, controlling, yes. But not old, not frail, not someone who might fall in her bathroom and lie there until help arrived. Can we see her? Mark asked. Of course, she's in room 217. She's on pain medication, so she may be a bit groggy. We took the elevator to the second floor, neither of us speaking. I could sense Mark processing this new reality, his strong-willed, fiercely independent mother suddenly vulnerable, possibly unable to care for herself. Judith looked smaller somehow against the white hospital sheets, her usual perfect coiffure, disheveled, her face pale without its carefully applied makeup. Her right arm was immobilized in a temporary cast, an IV line running into her left. Mark, she said when she saw us, attempting to straighten up and wincing at the movement. You didn't need to rush over. I told Rebecca it wasn't serious. A broken wrist and hip isn't serious? Mark's voice held a touch of exasperation as he moved to her bedside. Mom, what happened? I simply lost my balance, she said dismissively. The bathroom floor was wet. It could have happened to anyone. Her eyes flickered to me, standing awkwardly in the doorway. Rebecca, you came too. It wasn't quite a question, nor was it welcoming. Of course, I said simply, staying where I was. Mark pulled a chair closer to the bed. The doctor says you'll need surgery tomorrow, and then rehabilitation. You won't be able to manage on your own for a while. Judith's expression tightened. Don't be ridiculous. It's a small fracture. I'll be perfectly fine after the surgery. Mom, you won't be able to put weight on your hip. And with your wrist in a cast, you can't use a walker properly. You'll need help. I'll hire someone, she said firmly. The doctor also mentioned your apartment has a lot of tripping hazards. Mark chose his words carefully. And that your blood work showed vitamin deficiencies. Have you been eating properly? Judith's eyes flashed with familiar indignation. I don't appreciate being interrogated while I'm lying in a hospital bed, Mark. My housekeeping and diet are none of your concern. I recognized the deflection tactic, the way she shifted from vulnerable to attacked in an instant. Mark recognized it too, but pressed on gently. Mom, I'm worried about you. Jennifer is worried too. I called her on the way here. We both think you should consider staying with one of us during your recovery. With Jennifer, Judith said immediately. Her house has that guest suite on the first floor. Mark hesitated. Jennifer's traveling for work for the next month, remember? That consulting project in Europe? Judith's face fell slightly, then hardened with resolve. Well, I'll just have to manage on my own. I won't be a burden. The word burden hung in the air. A perfect encapsulation of Judith's particular brand of manipulation, rejecting help while simultaneously making others feel guilty for not forcing it upon her. Mark shot me a desperate look. I knew what he was thinking. Despite everything Judith had put us through, the unauthorized move-in, the life insurance lawsuit, the years of subtle undermining, he couldn't leave his mother to fend for herself while injured. It wasn't in his nature. I took a deep breath, stepping forward. Judith, you should stay with us while you recover. Both Mark and Judith turned to stare at me with identical expressions of shock. I almost laughed at the rare moment of perfect alignment between them. That's very generous, Rebecca, Judith said slowly, suspicion evident in her tone, but unnecessary. Actually, it's quite necessary, I countered. You need a safe place to recover with people who can help you. Our house has a bedroom and full bathroom on the first floor. Mark works from home 2 days a week, and my schedule is flexible. I met her gaze directly. It's the logical solution. Mark was watching me with a mixture of gratitude and concern. He knew what I was offering. 6 to 8 weeks of having Judith in our home, this time by invitation rather than invasion. Are you sure? He asked quietly. I nodded. We have the space and the time. It makes sense. Judith looked between us, clearly calculating her options. Pride urged her to refuse, to maintain her independence. Practicality told her she had few alternatives. And perhaps, though she'd never admit it, there was relief in not having to face her recovery alone. It would only be until I can manage the basics myself, she said finally. A few weeks at most. Of course, I agreed. Just until you're back on your feet. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on any of us. 2 years ago, Judith had moved into our house without permission, claiming it as her right as Mark's mother. Now she was returning, this time as an invited guest, one who needed our help rather than one who had come to take control. The surgery went smoothly the next morning. By afternoon, Judith was moved to a regular room, her wrist now properly set, in a cast, a detailed rehabilitation plan drawn up by the hospital's physical therapy team. The discharge was scheduled for 2 days later, giving us time to prepare the house for her arrival. Are you absolutely sure about this? Mark asked as we transformed our rarely used formal dining room into a temporary bedroom. After everything she put us through, I smoothed the sheets on the hospital bed we'd rented. I'm sure. She needs help, and we're in a position to provide it. I paused, tucking in a corner. Besides, it's different this time. She's not moving in to take over. She's coming because she needs us. Mark nodded slowly. It is different, but I'm still worried about you. Mom can be difficult even at the best of times. And being injured, dependent, she's going to hate it. And she'll probably take it out on me, I acknowledged. I know, but we've established boundaries now. We know how to handle her. I smiled wryly. And this time, we're the ones with the power. Mark winced. That's what worries me. I understood his concern. Power dynamics in families are complicated, and they can shift in an instant. 2 years ago, Judith had wielded her position as Mark's mother like a weapon, using emotional manipulation to claim authority in our home. Now, the tables were turned. She would be dependent on us, primarily on me, given our work schedules, for her basic needs. It would be easy to use that dependency against her, to exact subtle revenge for her past behavior, but that wasn't why. I'd offered to help. Despite everything, Judith was family, and more importantly, she was important to Mark. I promise not to abuse my position as caregiver, I said, keeping my tone light. No slipping broccoli into her food or accidentally forgetting her pain medication. Mark laughed, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. I know you'd never do that. I want you both to survive this with your dignity intact. We will, I assured him, though privately I wondered if Judith would allow it. She had never been good at accepting help, at acknowledging vulnerability. This enforced dependence would be a profound challenge to her sense of self. Judith arrived at our house on a Thursday afternoon, transported from the hospital via medical transport. She sat rigidly in the wheelchair as the orderlies wheeled her into the house, her expression a carefully maintained mask of stoicism despite the pain she must have been feeling. Welcome back, I said as Mark signed the discharge papers. We've set up a room for you on this floor, so you won't have to navigate the stairs. Judith nodded stiffly. Thank you. Those 2 words, seemingly simple but rarely spoken by my mother-in-law, signaled the strangeness of our new situation. Judith was uncomfortable with gratitude, with acknowledging that she needed something she couldn't provide for herself. The first few days established our new routine. Mark helped Judith with morning care before leaving for work, administering her pain medication and assisting her to the bathroom. I took over during the day, helping her with meals, monitoring her physical therapy exercises, making sure she was comfortable. Mark handled the evening shift when he returned from work. We operated like a well-coordinated team, minimizing Judith's discomfort while preserving as much of her independence as possible. But it wasn't easy. Judith alternated between grim stoicism and flashes of her old controlling self. The physical therapist said I should be doing these exercises 3 times daily, she informed me icily on the 4th morning as I helped her through the prescribed routine. You've only been having me do them twice. Actually, the discharge instructions specify twice daily for the first week, then increasing to 3 times in week 2, I replied calmly, retrieving the paperwork from the folder we kept on the side table. See? It's right here. Judith squinted at the page, then huffed in annoyance. Well, I feel I could benefit from doing them more frequently. If you'd like to do an extra set on your own, that's fine. But I can't stay and assist you more than twice today. I have a client meeting in an hour. She muttered something under her breath about priorities, but let the matter drop. It was a small victory in the subtle power struggle that characterized our interactions, her attempting to assert control, me gently but firmly maintaining boundaries. The most challenging aspects were the intimate ones. Judith needed help washing her hair, changing certain items of clothing, managing personal hygiene. She hated asking, hated showing weakness, hated being dependent on the daughter-in-law she had never fully accepted. I can manage on my own, she insisted the first time I offered to help her wash her hair, a week into her stay. Judith, you have a cast on your dominant wrist and you can't stand for more than a few minutes. Let me help. I'll wait for Mark to come home. I sighed, recognizing the implication, that somehow assistance from her son was acceptable, but from me, it was intrusive. Mark won't be home for 6 hours. Your hair needs washing now. She glared at me, a complex mixture of emotions playing across her face. Pride, embarrassment, resentment. Finally, practicality won out. Fine, but be quick about it. I set up a chair next to the bathroom sink, draping towels to protect her cast and clothing. As I gently guided her head back, wetting her silver hair with the spray nozzle, I felt her rigid posture, the way she held herself apart from me even in this necessary moment of intimacy. Water temperature okay? I asked. It's fine, she said tightly. I worked in silence, applying shampoo, massaging her scalp with careful fingers, rinsing thoroughly. It was strange to be touching this woman who had caused so much turmoil in our lives, to be providing such personal care. Her hair was thinner than I'd realized, her scalp showing through in places, another sign of aging she had carefully concealed, with skillful styling. As I wrapped a towel around her wet hair, I caught her watching me in the mirror, an unreadable expression on her face. "Thank you," she said stiffly. That was not as uncomfortable as I anticipated. Coming from Judith, it was practically effusive praise. "You're welcome," I replied simply. Something shifted subtly after that day. Not dramatically. Judith didn't suddenly transform into a warm, appreciative mother-in-law. But the sharp edges of her resistance softened slightly. She stopped insisting that Mark handle certain aspects of her care. She began saying, "please," and "thank you" with marginally less reluctance. Small adjustments, but noticeable ones. 3 weeks into her stay, I was working at my desk when I heard a thud and a cry of pain from the makeshift bedroom. I rushed in to find Judith on the floor beside her bed, her face contorted in agony. "What happened?" I demanded, kneeling beside her, quickly assessing for new injuries. "I was trying to reach my book," she gasped, nodding toward the paperback that had fallen just out of reach. "I thought I could manage." "You're supposed to call for help," I reminded her, helping her back onto the bed with care not to jostle. Her healing hip. "That's what the bell is for." "I didn't want to disturb you," she said, wincing as she settled against the pillows. I checked her hip and wrist, relieved to find no obvious new damage. "Did you hit your head when you fell?" "No," she admitted. "Just my pride." It was such an un-Judith-like comment, so candid and self-aware that I couldn't help but smile. "Well, pride heals faster than bones, but please use the bell next time." She nodded, then hesitated. "Rebecca, may I ask you something?" "Of course," I said, surprised by the tentative tone. "Why did you offer to let me stay here? After everything?" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. After everything I did, after moving in without permission, after the lawsuit, after years of trying to undermine your marriage. I considered deflecting with a platitude about family, but Judith deserved honesty. "Because you needed help. And because despite our differences, you're important to Mark, which makes you important to me." She studied me for a long moment. "I would not have done the same," she admitted finally. "If our positions were reversed." The frankness of the statement caught me off guard. "I know," I said simply. "You must think I'm a terrible person." "I think you're a person who's used to being in control," I said carefully. "And now you're not. That's hard for anyone." Judith's eyes narrowed slightly, as if searching for condescension or manipulation in my words. Finding none, she sighed. "I wasn't always like this, you know, so difficult." The last word emerged reluctantly. William used to say I was the most adaptable person he knew. "What changed?" I asked, genuinely curious. She was quiet for so long, I thought she wasn't going to answer. "Fear, I suppose," she said finally. "When you get older, you start losing things. Independence, relevance, people. Her fingers plucked at the edge of the blanket. William and I were married for 43 years. When he died, I lost more than a husband. I lost my place in the world. I hadn't expected such honesty, such vulnerability. This wasn't the Judith I knew, the imperious, controlling woman who had moved into our house uninvited. This was someone more complex, more human. "I think I understand," I said slowly. "When you feel like you're losing control, you try to hold on tighter to whatever you can still influence." "Like Mark," she acknowledged. "My relationship with him was something I could still shape, still direct." She met my eyes directly. "I resented you for changing that dynamic. I didn't take him away from you, Judith. I just helped him see that he can love both of us, but in different ways." She nodded almost imperceptibly. "I know that now. I didn't then." A faint, wry smile touched her lips. Lying in a hospital bed gives one rather too much time for reflection. That moment of honesty with Judith marked a turning point in our relationship, though neither of us acknowledged it directly. The admission wasn't followed by tearful reconciliation or sudden warmth. That would have been too dramatic, too unlike the reserved woman who had raised Mark. Instead, the change manifested in small ways. Less resistance during physical therapy, fewer barbed comments about my housekeeping, occasional questions about my photography work that seemed genuinely interested rather than performatively polite. 4 weeks into her stay, I was reviewing client photos in the living room when Judith wheeled herself in, her mobility improving enough that she could manage short distances in the wheelchair we'd rented. "May I join you?" she asked, a courtesy. She wouldn't have bothered with a month earlier. "Of course," I replied, making space for her wheelchair beside the couch. "I'm just editing some engagement photos from last week's shoot." Judith maneuvered carefully into position, glancing at my laptop screen. "You have quite an eye for composition," she observed. "These are lovely." The compliment, delivered without qualification or backhanded comparison, caught me off guard. "Thank you." She studied the images as I scrolled through them. "How did you get into photography? Was it something you studied in school?" "Not formally," I explained, surprised by her interest. "I started taking pictures in high school, just as a hobby at first. I majored in business, actually, with a minor in visual arts. The business degree has been as useful as the creative training, especially since I started my own studio." Judith nodded thoughtfully. "That's sensible. Many artists neglect the business side, I imagine." "They do," I agreed. I was fortunate that my father emphasized practical skills alongside creative pursuits. He always said passion doesn't pay the bills unless you know how to market it properly. "Your father sounds like a wise man," Judith said, then hesitated. "I don't believe I've ever asked much about your family." The understatement was almost comical. In 5 years of knowing each other, Judith had never shown the slightest interest in my background beyond determining it wasn't prestigious enough for her son. "My parents live in Seattle now," I offered. "Dad's semi-retired from his architectural firm, and Mom teaches piano. My younger sister is in medical school in Boston. Do you see them often?" "A couple times a year. We're planning to visit for Thanksgiving, actually." I paused, then added, "You'd be welcome to join us if you're feeling up to traveling by then." The invitation was spontaneous, not something Mark and I had discussed, but it felt right in the moment, an olive branch, an acknowledgement of the shifting dynamic between us. Judith looked genuinely startled. "That's very kind. But I wouldn't want to impose on your family time." "It wouldn't be an imposition," I assured her. "My parents are very relaxed hosts. The more the merrier is practically their motto." She smiled faintly. "Unlike me, you mean?" I laughed, surprised by her self-awareness. "Well, we all have different entertaining styles." "Indeed." She adjusted the blanket across her lap, looking thoughtful. I'll consider it, if my recovery continues at this pace. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a reflexive no either. From Judith, that qualified as significant progress. As her 5th week with us began, Judith's physical therapist upgraded her status, approving limited weight bearing on her healing hip and recommending increased mobility exercises. The cast on her wrist would remain for another 3 weeks, but she was regaining independence more rapidly than expected. "The doctor says I'm progressing exceptionally well," she announced after Mark drove her to her follow-up appointment. "He attributes it to excellent care and compliance with the therapy regimen." Mark caught my eye over his mother's head, his expression one of amused disbelief. Judith was many things, but compliant had never been one of them. Her adherence to the physical therapy program had involved constant negotiation, frequent complaints, and occasional outright refusal, until I developed a system of small rewards and accomplishments that appealed to her competitive nature. "That's wonderful news," I said. "You've worked hard." Judith straightened in her wheelchair, pride evident in her posture. "The physical therapist says I might be able to return to independent living sooner than anticipated, perhaps in another 2 to 3 weeks. I felt a surprising twinge of something like disappointment. After dreading Judith's extended stay, I found myself not entirely ready for it to end. Not because I'd miss her difficult moments or the extra work of caregiving, but because I sensed we were on the verge of something important, a genuine shift in our relationship that needed more time to solidify. "That's certainly faster than we expected," I said carefully. "But there's no rush. You're welcome to stay until you're completely confident in your ability to manage on your own." Judith studied me, perhaps searching for insincerity. Finding none, she nodded. "Thank you. I appreciate that." That evening, after Judith had retired to her room, Mark and I sat on the porch swing, enjoying the mild spring air and a rare moment of privacy. "Mom seems eager to get back to her place," Mark observed, his arm around my shoulders. I thought, she might push to stay longer, honestly, take advantage of the situation. "Maybe she's actually respecting our boundaries for once," I suggested. "Or maybe she's just ready to reclaim her independence." "Probably the latter," Mark said with a chuckle. "Still, I'm grateful for how you've handled all this. I know it hasn't been easy." I leaned against him, considering the past 5 weeks. "It's been illuminating, actually. I'm seeing different sides of your mother, vulnerable sides. I've noticed that too. She's less guarded somehow, less rigid." He hesitated. "Do you think it's just because she's physically dependent right now? Or something more permanent?" "I'm not sure," I admitted. "People don't change fundamentally at 72, but perspectives can shift. Priorities can realign." "I hope so," Mark said softly. "I've always wished you two could find some common ground." I smiled at the irony. "Well, it only took a broken hip and wrist to create an opportunity." The next morning, I was startled to find Judith already awake and attempting to make coffee when I came downstairs. She stood at the counter, awkwardly measuring grounds one-handed into the filter. "You should have called for help," I admonished gently, moving to assist her. "I wanted to try doing something useful," she replied. "I'm tired of being waited on hand and foot." I took over the coffee preparation, understanding her frustration. "The more you heal, the more you'll be able to do independently. But pushing too hard too fast can set back your recovery." She sighed, easing herself onto a kitchen chair. "I know, it's just difficult to be so helpless." "It's temporary," I reminded her, setting the coffee to brew. "And you're hardly helpless. You've made remarkable progress." Judith was quiet for a moment, watching me move around the kitchen preparing breakfast. "You've been very patient," she said finally. "Both of you, but especially you, Rebecca." The statement hung in the air, weighted with unspoken history. All the times she hadn't been patient with me. All the ways she had tried to undermine rather than support. "It's what family does," I said simply. She looked down at her hands, one encased in the bulky cast. "I haven't always treated you as family." The admission, offered without prompting, caught me by surprise. "No," I agreed. "You haven't." I told myself it was because I was protecting Mark, that you weren't right for him. She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. But that wasn't true. I was protecting myself, my role in his life. I didn't want to share him. The frankness of her words created a strange intimacy between us. Not warmth exactly, but honesty, which was perhaps more valuable given our history. "I understand that," I said carefully. "Mark is your only son. Your relationship with him defines a significant part of your identity." "It shouldn't, though," she said with unexpected insight. "That's not fair to him. Or to me, really." I set a mug of coffee in front of her, modified with the handle positioned for easy gripping with her good hand. It's never too late to redefine relationships. Judith wrapped her fingers around the mug, considering my words. "Perhaps not, but it's certainly harder at my age." The conversation was interrupted by Mark's arrival in the kitchen, hair still damp from his shower. "Morning, ladies. Am I interrupting something?" "Just coffee and conversation," I said lightly. "Your mother was telling me how ready she is to get back to some of her normal activities." Mark glanced between us, sensing something significant had transpired but unable to pinpoint it. "Well, the doctor said light activities are fine now. Maybe we could all go out for dinner this weekend? Get you out of the house for a bit, Mom?" "I'd like that," Judith agreed, "as long as it's not somewhere with too many stairs." As the days passed, Judith grew steadily more mobile, progressing from the wheelchair to a walker, practicing on the relatively flat surfaces of our home. Her confidence increased along with her physical capabilities, though there were still moments of frustration when her body wouldn't cooperate with her expectations. "This is ridiculous," she muttered one afternoon, struggling to maneuver the walker through the slightly narrower doorway to the bathroom. "I feel like a toddler learning to walk." "Learning to walk is actually an impressive developmental achievement," I pointed out, standing nearby in case she needed support. "Most toddlers fall dozens of times a day while they're mastering it." Judith shot me a look that was half irritation, half reluctant amusement. "Are you comparing me to a child, Rebecca?" "I'm saying that mastering physical skills at any age is challenging and worthy of respect," I clarified. "Even the skills we take for granted until we have to relearn them." She considered this, then nodded slightly. "A fair point, though not particularly comforting when one is 72 and can't manage a doorway. Would it help if I told you the doorway is narrower than standard? It's one of the quirks of this old house we haven't gotten around to fixing yet." Judith's lips twitched in what might have been a suppressed smile. "Marginally comforting, yes." 6 weeks into her stay, we celebrated a significant milestone, Judith's first outing beyond medical appointments. Mark took the day off work, and the three of us went to lunch at a small cafe with accessible entrances and comfortable seating. It was a simple excursion, but Judith approached it with the seriousness of an expedition, insisting on doing her hair and applying makeup for the first time since her accident. "You didn't need to get all dressed up for Riverside Cafe," Mark teased as he helped her into the car. "It's just sandwiches and soup." "I haven't been seen in public in 6 weeks," Judith replied with dignity. "I have a certain standard to maintain." I caught her applying lipstick in the car mirror, checking her reflection with critical eyes. In that moment, I recognized something familiar. Not the controlling mother-in-law I'd come to dread, but a woman who found security and self-respect in her appearance, in presenting a certain image to the world. It was a vulnerability disguised as vanity, and I understood it better than I'd expected to. The lunch was pleasant, unmarred by the tension that had characterized so many of our previous outings together. Judith was subdued but engaged, asking about Mark's work projects and my upcoming photography assignments with what seemed like genuine interest. When our server recognized me from local business events and stopped to chat enthusiastically about my recent exhibition, I braced for Judith's usual dismissive remarks about my little hobby. Instead, she surprised me by saying, "Rebecca's quite talented. We have several of her landscapes hanging in our home." The hour didn't escape my notice, a small but significant acknowledgement of my place in Mark's life, in the family structure. Mark noticed it too, reaching under the table to squeeze my hand. As we drove home, Judith seemed tired but satisfied. "That was lovely," she said, gazing out the window at the familiar streets of Oakwood. "I've missed being out and about." "We can do more outings as you continue to improve," Mark offered. "Maybe visit that art gallery downtown you always enjoyed." "I'd like that," Judith agreed, then added unexpectedly, "Perhaps Rebecca would join us. She might appreciate the photography exhibits they feature occasionally." The invitation, casual as it was, represented another small step forward. Not just tolerance of my presence, but active inclusion. I caught Mark's surprised glance in the rearview mirror. "I'd enjoy that," I said simply. That evening, as Mark helped Judith prepare for bed, I overheard fragments of their conversation drifting from her room. "Oh, different than I expected," Judith was saying. "What is?" Mark asked. "Living here, being dependent on you both." A pause. "On Rebecca, especially. She's pretty amazing, isn't she?" Another pause. "Yes," Judith admitted, so quietly, I almost missed it. "She is." I moved away, not wanting to eavesdrop further, a strange feeling expanding in my chest. Not triumph or vindication, but something more complex. A sense that the ground had shifted beneath us all, creating new possibilities for connection. As the 7-week mark approached, Judith began speaking more concretely about returning to her condo. The physical therapist had cleared her for limited independent living, provided she had grab bars installed in key locations and used her walker consistently. Her cast would be removed in another week, further increasing her self-sufficiency. "Jennifer has arranged for the bathroom modifications already," she informed us over dinner. "And she's hired a service to clean the condo before I return." "That's great," Mark said, though I detected a note of uncertainty in his voice. "But there's no rush, Mom. You're welcome to stay until you're completely confident about managing on your own." Judith set down her fork carefully. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough. You and Rebecca need your privacy, your normal routines back." "It hasn't been an imposition," I said truthfully. "But we understand your desire to return to your own space." She nodded, looking relieved that we weren't going to argue. "I thought perhaps next weekend? That would give time for the bathroom modifications to be completed, and my cast should be off by Thursday." "If that's what you want," Mark agreed. "But we'll need to discuss ongoing support. You'll still need help with certain things, at least for a while." "Jennifer has researched home health services," Judith said. "Someone can come in a few times a week." I watched her as she outlined these arrangements, noting the careful way she presented everything as already decided, already organized. Judith needed to feel in control of her departure just as much as she'd tried to control her arrival in our lives 2 years earlier. The difference was that now I understood the fear underlying that need for control. "That sounds like a solid plan," I acknowledged. "But please remember, we're only 30 minutes away. You can call if you need anything between home health visits." Judith looked slightly surprised at the offer. "That's very kind." "It's what family does," I said, echoing my words from weeks earlier, but this time they carried new weight, new meaning. The night before Judith was scheduled to return to her condo, I found her in the living room, looking through a photo album she'd asked Mark to bring from her storage closet. She glanced up as I entered, closing the album partially. I hope I'm not interrupting, I said. Not at all, she replied, reopening the album. Just indulging in a bit of nostalgia. Would you like to see? I sat beside her on the couch, recognizing the invitation for the olive branch it was. I'd love to. She turned the pages slowly, showing me photographs of Mark as a child, gap-toothed and grinning on his first bicycle, serious-faced in his Little League uniform, gangly and awkward at his high school graduation. Interspersed were pictures of Judith and Bill, younger, brighter versions of themselves, looking at each other with unmistakable affection. You were a beautiful couple, I observed, studying a particularly striking image of them dancing at what appeared to be a wedding. We had our moments, Judith agreed, a soft smile playing at her lips. 43 years isn't all romance, of course. We had our share of arguments, compromises. What was the secret? I asked, genuinely curious. To making it work for so long? She considered the question seriously. Respect, I suppose. Even when we disagreed, which was often enough, we respected each other's perspective. She traced the outline of Bill's face in one photograph. And adapting together. Life throws curveballs. The ones who last are the ones who change course together, not separately. The wisdom in her words struck me. Judith, for all her difficult qualities, had maintained a successful marriage for over 4 decades. There was something to be learned. Something valuable. I hope Mark and I have that, I said honestly. 40+ years of building a life together. Judith looked at me directly. You will, she said with unexpected certainty. You've already weathered more than many couples do in their first decade, including me, she added with a self-awareness that still surprised me. Thank you for saying that, I replied, recognizing the significance of the acknowledgement. She turned another page in the album, revealing photos of Mark's college graduation. I was very hard on Mark growing up, she said suddenly. Always pushing, always expecting perfection. Bill was the balance, the one who said good job when I was saying could be better. That's often how parenting partnerships work, I offered. Different approaches, different strengths. Perhaps, Judith agreed. But after Bill died, there was no counterweight to my tendencies. I became more controlling, more fearful. She closed the album carefully. I told myself I was protecting Mark. In reality, I was trying to protect myself from losing him too. The honesty of her reflection created a moment of profound connection between us. Not as mother-in-law and daughter-in-law with all the complicated history that entailed, but simply as 2 women who loved the same man in different but equally legitimate ways. You haven't lost him, I said gently. He's still your son. That doesn't change because he's also my husband. I know that now, she admitted. It took a broken hip and being completely at your mercy to see it clearly, but I do understand. She smiled wryly. I'm not saying I'll never be difficult again. Old habits and all that. I laughed. I wouldn't expect a personality transplant, Judith. Just maybe a little more willingness to see me as an ally rather than a rival. I believe I can manage that, she agreed with surprising grace. The next morning, Mark and I helped Judith pack her few belongings for the return to her condo. The process was efficiently completed. Judith had never fully unpacked, as if maintaining the fiction that her stay was temporary, even as it extended to nearly 2 months. As Mark loaded her suitcase into the car, Judith paused in our entryway, leaning on her walker as she surveyed the house that had been her temporary home. I want to thank you both, she said formally. For your care, your patience. I know I haven't always been the easiest person to help. Your family, Mark said simply, moving to stand beside me. We take care of each other. Judith nodded, her eyes suspiciously bright. Yes, well, in any case, I am grateful. She straightened as much as her healing body would allow. "And I would like to extend an invitation. Once I'm properly settled, perhaps you could both come for dinner? I make an excellent pot roast." The invitation, ordinary for most families but unprecedented in our history with Judith, hung in the air like an unexpected gift. "We'd like that," I said, speaking for both of us. "Very much." Mark helped his mother to the car, settling her carefully into the passenger seat. As he closed the door, he turned to me with a mixture of wonder and cautious optimism on his face. Did my mother just voluntarily invite us to dinner at her place, without an ulterior motive or guilt trip attached? I smiled, slipping my arm around his waist. I believe she did. Miracles never cease. As we drove toward Judith's condo, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us to this point. 2 years ago, Judith had moved into our house without permission, declaring, "This is my son's home now," in a brazen attempt to reclaim control over Mark's life. Her action had forced a confrontation years in the making, requiring Mark to finally establish boundaries, requiring me to stand firm in my place as his partner. Now, she was leaving our home with permission and gratitude, with a new understanding of what family could mean. Not ownership or control, but support. Not exclusivity, but inclusion. Not competition, but collaboration. The transformation wasn't complete or perfect. Judith would always be Judith, proud, occasionally difficult, inclined toward control. There would be future conflicts, future moments of tension. But something fundamental had shifted, creating space for a different kind of relationship, one built on mutual respect rather than grudging tolerance. As we pulled into the parking lot of her condominium complex, I caught Judith's eye in the rearview mirror. She offered a small smile, not the polished social smile she typically wore in public, but something more genuine, more vulnerable. "Ready to go home?" I asked. She nodded, looking ahead at the familiar building. "Yes," she said, "but perhaps I have more than one home now." It wasn't a dramatic declaration or an emotional reconciliation. It was simply a quiet acknowledgement of a new reality, that homes, like families, can expand to include more than we initially imagine. That boundaries, properly established and respected, don't divide us, but rather create the safety needed for genuine connection. Mark squeezed my hand as we parked, a silent recognition of how far we'd all come since that fateful day when Judith had moved in without permission and unwittingly set in motion a chain of events that would transform all our relationships. Sometimes I reflected as we helped Judith from the car. The most intrusive actions lead to the most necessary growth. And sometimes, what begins as an invasion ends as an invitation to greater understanding, to deeper connection, to the complex, imperfect, essential bonds of family. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.